Alright guys, so I have more breaking updates for you. America is scrambling to the Middle East. Everyone there is afraid of a wider war breaking out. And there's fear building in the Indo-Pacific as well. A lot of panic is circling Taiwan as their election nears. And they fear that China might make a move. And if you think 2024 will be a year of peace, I've got bad news. Even if we take away the entire Russia-Ukraine situation, the rest of the world is just one big powder keg waiting to explode. And let's talk about the Middle East first. The US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, he's on a mission. He's heading to the region to prevent an escalation of the conflict. And here's a message for the Houthis. The Red Sea crisis is about to escalate further and the US is desperate. They sent Blinken there to tell the Houthis to behave or else. In our lead story today, Blinken warns of consequences for Houthis if Red Sea strikes persist. Remember the role of the United States in the Middle East. The justification for having US bases there is to keep the peace. If the US can't solve this crisis, then their influence will drain further away. What's the point of having US military presence there if there's a new crisis happening every other week? According to Blinken, these attacks are having a real effect on the prices that people have to pay for food, for medicine, for energy. Ships have to get diverted to other places. Insurance rates go up as well. The economic costs are piling up and he's desperate to solve this. If the Red Sea attacks continue or even escalate, another inflation crisis is coming for the world. However, there is a dilemma here. If the US coalition strikes the Houthis in Yemen, this might very well drag Iran into the mess. Then the regional war could really escalate to unthinkable levels. The Arab world knows this, right? It's basic logic. Qatar specifically told Blinken that military action isn't a smart idea. They warned it would only raise regional tensions and fuel the endless cycle of violence. This is what happens when you refuse a ceasefire. You sandwich yourself into an impossible situation. The US is now standing in an escalation minefield where there's simply no good option around. If they take action, they could blow things up. And if they don't, then they'll look weak and will have a bigger economic crisis. And throughout Blinken's trip, you have Arab leaders all asking him to push for a ceasefire. But it's not going to happen. If you read the messages coming out from Israel, the war in Gaza is not going to stop. The IDF has made a statement that they expect the fighting to continue for at least a year more. There's an extremely long window for escalations to happen. And the true fear Blinken has is the hollowing out of US influence in the region. 2024 might just be the year where the US loses the Middle East. Blinken isn't just scrambling for a ceasefire, he's trying to salvage America's reputation as well, especially with the Saudis. Even as the war rages on, the US is scrambling to save the Saudi-Israel deal. It's on the edge of oblivion and Blinken is attempting a mission impossible. During his trip to Saudi Arabia, he met with the Crown Prince in a tent near a desert. He talked with MBS and the big topic was, of course, the Saudi-Israel normalization deal. They want to counter China's influence there and this deal is a key part of that plan. Apparently, he's very optimistic. He said there was clear interest between Israel and Saudi Arabia to rebuild relations. The MBS is still interested in the deal, but I think that's a big stretch and Blinken's doing a lot of projecting. Let's look at the evidence on the ground. It's telling us the exact opposite. It's painting a picture that the Saudi-Israel deal is now 6 feet under. In a poll by the Washington Institute, people in Saudi Arabia oppose normalization. 96% of the Saudis believe that Arab countries should cut all ties with Israel. Not just diplomatic and political ties, but economic relations as well. This is the will of the people and I find it hard to see MBS going directly against that, especially when there's no ceasefire coming. Until the war ends and a two-state solution is established, this will be a pipe dream. And it's important we understand the overall sentiment in the Middle East today. During his trip, Middle East leaders have been telling Blinken that anti-US opinion is starting to grow. The longer America supports Israel, the more support they will lose in the region. The big question now is if the US is willing to go down with the ship. Now that Saudi Arabia is officially a BRICS member, normalization with Israel will be near impossible. If we look at the BRICS, it's clear that a global split is already here. The G7 is in blue and the BRICS 10 is in red. The majority of new members come from the Middle East, Iran, the UAE and of course Saudi Arabia. And it's clear where the winds are blowing. While the US is losing ground, China is gaining ground in the Middle East. First was the $7 billion currency swap agreement, and that is a clear step towards eventual de-dollarization. As the Saudis and China trade more in local currency, it's just a matter of time before oil gets priced in yuan as well. But it's not just swap lines or currencies. Saudi Arabia is going full China, especially in their oil and gas business. Saudi Aramco is now in talks with China's Rongshen to buy stakes in each other's refining units. China wants to buy a 50% stake in the Saudi unit, while Aramco plans to buy a 50% stake as well in Rongshen's refinery. Both countries are starting to diversify their supply chains beyond their own country. China wants a foothold in Saudi Arabia to secure their energy supply. They want to be directly at the source. Saudi Arabia also wants a presence in China. They are looking at the Middle East situation and they kind of realize what a disaster this situation has become, right? With the Red Sea crisis getting worse, the Strait of Hormuz isn't safe either. So they might as well own a refinery directly in China. They can immediately refine the crude oil there and sell it directly to their biggest trading partner, which is the Chinese. It's a smart move to secure their supply chains as well. Whatever influence the US is losing is working out to China's benefit. But let's shift gears a bit to Asia because things are heating up in Taiwan. The elections are coming and they are afraid of invasion from China. Now, for many years now, we have been hearing the same old rhetoric from the West that the unthinkable is about to happen. According to Gordon Chang, 2024 will be the year that China makes a move on Taiwan, and he's of course referring to Xi Jinping's New Year speech. But if we listen to the words, it doesn't say anything about any invasion. President Xi was referring to reunification. He mentioned how this will be inevitable, but I can't find a statement about launching a D-Day invasion. There's always a peaceful way to go about it. Think about it, guys. If your economy is about to surpass the West in the years to come, there isn't a need to move in now. You just need to focus on building your economy and playing the waiting game. There isn't a need to rush. China measures strategic moves in decades, not even in years. So I'm quite confident that no invasion is needed for reunification. Starting a conflict with Taiwan won't be in China's interest as well. However, getting provoked into one is a totally different issue. And this is where we need to discuss the unthinkable scenario. What might provoke this and what are the consequences of a China-Taiwan conflict? Firstly, let's realize that China is being surrounded by US military bases. America has bases in South Korea, Japan, Guam, and the Philippines. China, of course, have their own bases, but those are on Chinese soil. There are already existing tensions in the region because of the US military presence there. Just imagine if China has bases in Cuba or Mexico, right? That would most definitely ramp up tensions with the Americans as well. So it's important to understand the context. I'll leave it to you to decide if this is provocation or not. I'm just stating the facts here. Why does the US have a ton of bases there? Is basically to contain China. It's part of US foreign policy to control what's known as the First Island Chain. In this map, it's quite clear why US bases are located where they are. By having bases from South Korea all the way to the Philippines, America believes that's the best way to counter any Chinese invasion. By having Taiwan tied to the West, it allows the US to contain China in their own backyard. Chinese ships won't be able to freely navigate out without being at risk. However, this struggle over Taiwan isn't just about the military. There's a big financial reason as well. US companies have a big interest in the Taiwanese economy, especially in their chip-making foundries. Because of Taiwan's semiconductor industry, a lot of money has been flowing into their economy. In 2022, foreign direct investments or FDIs into Taiwan reached a recent high of $13.3 billion. There's a ton of money coming in and a big pile is Western money. So the stakes are enormously high for the US. They have a big economic interest in keeping Taiwan away from China. The battle for tomorrow is all about technology, about semiconductors, and that's why the tax sanctions on Beijing won't end. That's also why Taiwan, they are at the center of this US-China tensions. It's a grand geopolitical game and Taiwan is a very big chess piece. But let's analyze the unthinkable. What if a Chinese invasion happens? If that comes to pass, then the global economy is over. From Bloomberg, the war over Taiwan could cost over $10 trillion. A conflict over Taiwan would decimate everything. This is the doomsday forecast, but let's go through it. If a war breaks out, the financial cost would equal $10 trillion or about 10% of the global GDP. Comparing this to the other conflicts and financial collapses, we can see there's no comparison at all. The Gulf War, the Israel War, and 9/11 combined together are nothing compared to a Taiwan war. The 2008 financial crash and the 2020 lockdowns, they're all a walk in the park versus a Taiwan conflict. If China simply blockades Taiwan, it will also unleash economic hell and trigger a 5% collapse in global GDP. So it's either going to be a horrible recession or historic depression. And every time a big crash happens, we know what the end result will be, right? What the end game will be. Central banks around the world, they'll print money like crazy to push the crisis away. And the knock-on effect would be another inflation tsunami washing over us. And let's say a full war doesn't happen and only a blockade of Taiwan is done. Well, the end result is still disastrous. Taiwan is home to TSMC semiconductors, and they sell chips not just to China but to many Western companies as well. Over the past 10 years, more American tech companies rely more and more on Taiwan's chips. Apple, Nvidia, and AMD, they all need semiconductors from TSMC to function. If a blockade is done, chips can't hit to the West. Big tech, especially Apple, will be in big trouble. Nearly $8 trillion in market cap will be compromised in a very bad way. We like to use the words doom, unthinkable, and disaster here a lot, right? But a war in the Pacific over Taiwan will tear everything down. From supply chains breaking to financial sanctions, nothing is off the table. And Bloomberg just outlined how bad these scenarios can truly get. Now, if America gets dragged into the conflict, we'll have total chaos in the global economy. There will be a 100% cut in Taiwan trade. US-China trade will also collapse. There will be massive financial sanctions and tariffs from the G7 imposed on China as well. The GDP impact will be terrible. A 40% collapse in Taiwan, minus 16% for China, minus 6% for the US, and a 10% crash for the world. This will be an instant global depression, the equivalent of a financial Armageddon. If a blockade happens, the impacts aren't good either. Global GDP would drop by 5% because supply chains would simply break down. The collateral damage won't be just confined to Asia Pacific. The US will also be impacted in either scenario. A 3 to 7% GDP crash still equals a recession. And I kind of think this is just a conservative estimate. We still haven't added in the human cost and the long-term effects of financial sanctions. The amount of human collateral will devastate all sides for generations. This will change the entire economic landscape forever. If China does make a move in, it's almost a guarantee that the West will throw the book of sanctions on Beijing as well. It won't just be the US but the entire G7 deal attempt to isolate China. It's the copy of the sanctions playbook on Russia but amped up to 11. It will be financial punishments on a bigger scale. And in that attempt, it will destroy every economy on planet Earth. And let's use a simple example we are all familiar with, and that's China's holdings of US treasuries. Beijing has been selling off their bond holdings over the past few years. It has gone from well over $1 trillion to just $769 billion today. But there's still a ton of money that would likely get frozen. And what will that trigger? Another wave of de-dollarization and a bigger meltdown of the financial system. We could see the global south also band together to keep China afloat, and that would mean using more local currencies. China would probably get cut away from SWIFT as well, so transacting in dollars would be impossible. So a Taiwan war will also impact the future of the US dollar as well. It's like an earthquake that would trigger a ton of aftershocks and tsunamis, and that's why it's in everyone's best interest to prevent a war in the first place. China shouldn't think about taking Taiwan by force, and the US shouldn't try to provoke one as well. This is a no-win situation. Now, will the end of the world happen? It probably won't. Taiwan's frontrunner has pledged to maintain the status quo if elected. He'll continue engagement with Beijing and not rock the boat. So fingers crossed nothing will happen over the next few weeks. The world knows that Taiwan is a very big flashpoint, and if anything happens, we'll be instantly in a global depression. But let me know what you think. Can America prevent a bigger escalation in the Middle East? And is the Taiwan conflict really coming? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.